hands-on lab experience. It'll be proctored by us. So if you have questions during the lab, there'll be someone there to help you. And you only need to attend to start the lab during your allotted time. So the lab, I believe, will run up to 30 days. So once you get started, get in your lab, you don't have to finish it in the 4-hour window. You can kind of do it at your own pace, but you will have the benefit of an expert proctor to help with any questions during the lab period. And that sign-up link will be at the end of the presentation. All right, so let's get going. So a little bit about partner opportunity. There's huge opportunity for security right now. The nature of digital threats and cybercrime has really evolved over the last years, where, say in the past, cyber incidents were mostly annoying, especially for SMBs. I mean, there were certainly big ones we hear about in the news, but I'd say by and large, most breaches or incidents involved a handful of machines, and it wasn't common for them to have a huge disruption to the business. And that has really changed with the sophistication of the threat actors now. They're intentionally seeking to completely disrupt a business, by ransoming every device they can get their hands on, and they'll usually seek to remain hidden until such time they're confident that they can truly disrupt the business or stop all operations. And this is a unique threat, because that type of threat is successful, is guaranteed to be hugely disruptive, in some cases permanently disruptive to the business. So we need to defend against that. Security is top of mind for SMB customers. Last year, ransomware increased 300%, and we have more than 50% of those targeted at small businesses. So if your customer wasn't a target of ransomware last year, I have really bad news about this year. Right? Average cost of a data breach in SMB is $108,000. That's pretty significant for most of the SMBs I work with. And 90% of SMBs have told us they would consider hiring a new MSP if they believe that MSP had the right cybersecurity solution for them. So it's kind of serious business. But this threat does turn into partner opportunity. Customers need our partners to help them secure their business. It's critically important. Partners see security as their biggest area of growth. At events I go to, security is mostly what we talk about. A lot of partners are looking to figure out, how do they expand beyond delivering antivirus? How do they deliver security services at scale? And how do they do this without, a linear increase in cost? Right? There has to be some economies of scale. So to help with that, we have the security guide. The security guide is broken down into the sections seen on the screen. The Get It Started section, we have an identity protection checklist, email and app protection checklist, endpoint enrollment checklist, endpoint protection checklist, data protection checklist. Got some advanced security and additional recommendations. And the reason I did it this way is I wrote the first sections to try to help a partner get through the most important stuff quickly without necessarily getting sidelined on all the advanced stuff. It doesn't mean the advanced stuff isn't important, but I figure it's probably more important to get through the basics of all areas of security, get the customer up and running quickly, then maybe spend a little bit more time thinking about the more advanced capabilities. And as I said, we do have a hands-on lab available for this, so you can practice using the checklist in our hands-on lab environment. I have a link for that at the end. All right, so what is this SMB security guide? It's my best take at an all-in-one resource for partners to use as a checklist when planning to configure security for their customers. It shouldn't be used as the definitive guide, right? It's just guidelines. So without knowing anything else about you or your customer, these are our general recommendations. Right, so your customer has good reason, or you have good reason to change the recommendation in the guide, please feel free to do so. And we've put everything in one place, so you don't have to hunt and try to find stuff. There's helpful links to the actual product documentation for each section, and it's designed. There's two components of this. The guide is designed to make sure that we're briefing a partner as quickly as possible on all the relevant areas of security, and then the corresponding checklist is designed to be a guide you have in front of you when you're talking to a particular customer. So you can just discuss each line item with that customer and fill it out as you go. So how do you get it? Here's the link. It's at aka.ms/SMB security guide. This link does work, but when I checked this morning, this is linking to last year's version. So I'm sorry about that. It is scheduled to be updated today. So if you get a document with a date of 2022, stand by, it will quickly refresh into the 2023 document. So we also have the checklist available standalone. It's the same list, just without all the explanations or the helpful links. That's at aka.ms/SMB security checklist. All right, so the first section in our guide is the Getting Started guide. So let's dive into that. The first thing we recommend is partners consider adopting a formal cybersecurity network. We're not providing tons of cybersecurity framework guidance here, but at Microsoft, we do work directly with CIS and NIST. We think these are two great frameworks for US customers, and they're largely compatible with frameworks in other countries. But the advantage of using a framework is several factors. Number one, it'll help make sure that you don't forget anything. It's vendor agnostic, so the advice in the checklist isn't necessarily influenced by a desire to sell. So I think that also provides a little bit of credibility, but also drives a lot of credibility to your partner business. If you're helping your customers comply with a cybersecurity framework versus helping just on board to a number of security products, I think that just raises the bar overall for both you and your customer. The nice thing is too is Microsoft 365 really maps well to the CIS framework and the NIST framework, so we have broad coverage of those frameworks. So it also helps sell the services in Microsoft 365 when you can point out all the different areas that they either solve for or partially solve for in the framework. Now, the next section is a little bit of guidance on planning for identity management. Before we get into the thick of security things, we really need to decide, is the customer going to be cloud only for identity? Or are we going to have like hybrid with that Active Directory on premises? It's a few of those things that really just you need to know before you're going to really dive into and figure out how are we going to apply all the security controls. I think it makes sense to plan for administrative accounts before we start the work. Who is going to be the administrator? Which different roles do we need? Who the partner is going to be administering these tenants? I think it's super important to be upfront about that so everyone knows. I think it's before we deciding on device management capabilities, I think it's a really good idea just to have a discussion. What does a company provide for the customers or the employees? Is it acceptable for employees to use their own personal devices? Are there any risks associated with that? So these, in the Getting Started guide, these are usually high-level questions I go over with the customer. I think it's super important to have some licensing conversations up front. We typically recommend Microsoft 365 Business Premium for most SMB deployments. And I like having this conversation up front because I like to point out that our other SMB products like Business Basic and Business Standard do have security features, but they're not a security solution. So what I'd like to find out early is if the customer has interest or appetite into moving up, or at least we'll consider it. So we're not just narrowly looking at the features we have available in the license that they have. I also think it makes sense to figure out who our technical contacts are. There's several configuration items where we're going to be excluding a group from conditional access policies. We're going to need to send alerts to someone who's going to deal with security issues. We probably have information coming from the tenant that needs to go somewhere for someone to digest that. So I think it's a good idea. Just think about that in advance. Make sure that if we can, we make distribution groups for them. If we have like a PSA solution, we have that in mind. So we already know where we're going to send notification emails before we get going. There's pretty basic stuff. Like I said, I have guidance for each of these in the guide. You can read it. And our first section is our identity protection checklist. This is really where we try to answer, what is the best way to configure identity security for our customers? How do I ensure that identity security is configured correctly? My customer suspects identity compromise. How do I investigate that and report back? How do I train my customers to use MFA? Our checklist starts with the idea to apply the principles of least privilege. This is true for both the partner and the customer, right? So we really do need to think about who can do what in the tenant. I want to make sure we avoid giving everybody global admin, or when we need global admin, hopefully we have a just-in-time controller on that. It's important to create emergency access account. It's just talking with a partner yesterday who locked themselves out of a tenant. Fortunately, this was a test demo tenant, so they didn't actually lock them out of production tenant, but they locked themselves out of the tenant with using a script to update conditional access policies via the graph. And yeah, it's that happened 2 weeks ago, and even with their best efforts, it's still locked. So you don't want to do that on production accounts. Probably number one thing we need to do across the board is make sure we get multi-factor authentication turned on with conditional access policies. Our telemetry shows that we have lots of customers who haven't reached this step, and it's really, it's absolutely critical to do this. The passwords are easily discovered, stolen. So passwords just simply aren't enough. In fact, most folks we look at that are only using passwords for identity security have several ongoing instances of the user breaches where those users' passwords are known. We can see evidence that people are logging into their email who are not them in cases where there's just a password. It's just too easy for attackers to guess or steal or find someone's password. We want to enable self-password reset so users can reset their own passwords if they're using them. And we'll want to configure our Azure AD primary authentication method. What's this checklist look like? The screen up there is a standalone checklist. So let's walk through how to do some of these tasks. So our first item on the list is how do we apply principles of least privilege? So in our demo here, we're going to do this with Lighthouse. I'm logged into Lighthouse tenant with my partner credential. And right there in the middle of the screen is a prompt for me to set up GDAP for my organization. If you have not used this wizard, please have a look. It's really, it's a much better experience, a much more thorough experience than the GDAP setup in Partner Center, in my opinion. And it works really, really well. And so let's walk through it. When we begin our setup for GDAP, I'm brought up to a screen where I'm asked to define tiers of permission. So you can see there's a link at the top that says adopt recommended configurations is what you see here. So we've divided up the roles between account managers, service desks, specialists, escalation engineers, and just-in-time only. These refer to groups at the partner organization, right? So this tool will organize it this way. If you want to do something different, you can, but this is a pretty good baseline to start. And it's easy to just use this because it's built in. I like it a lot. Typically, my level 3, level 4 technical folks are in the escalation engineers category. They're probably in the just-in-time only if they typically need global admin, but they'll get global admin only when they actually request it. So they don't have standing global admin all the time in all the customers. Okay, so we're prompted to create a GDAP template based on what we just saw. In this case, I created the First Up Consultants template. For many MSPs, they'll only need one template if you by and large treat your customers the same. But if you have different technicians servicing different customers and either by different verticals or different regions, you might want more than one template. It's totally fine. You can create as many templates as you would like. If I click on create a template, bring up the prompt. So here, I could create a template for, my East Coast customers if I want to. And I could, select the same tiers I had before or create new ones. In this case, I'm just going to go with a single template for my example. All right, so you click next. Now that we selected the template, we're prompted to set up security groups and fill those groups. You can do it right here. It's really, really nice. I don't have to exit, go into my partner admin and create groups and put users in. I can do it all right here. Even if I've already run the wizard, you can keep rerunning it if you need to add someone to the group. It is really quite easy. So we not only create the groups for the different roles, account managers, escalation engineers, just-in-time only, etc. We can also populate the groups all from one screen. So it's super, super handy. Take a look at this particular tier, my GDAP account managers. Like I say, I'm the only one in there. But if I needed to add users, it's very simple. I can just add and remove users right from this interface. Close that. Now that I have the right people in my partner organization in the right groups, it's time to assign this GDAP wizard to a tenant. So I've already assigned it to AAA, very successful company, PTY Limited, but now I want to assign it to Anya. So click Anya. You can see that Anya right now has DAP, and we're going to assign this to give them GDAP. Not only is this wizard really nice, it's also something that partners, everyone on this call needs to do. Microsoft is going to remove DAP. I don't know exactly when. I keep hearing soon. So I think it's super important to get ahead of that. You don't want to be caught in a crisis where you have to rush and get this set up. It's a better idea to set this up now. Also, currently, you can set up GDAP for your customers that already have given you DAP without going and get new admin consent from those customers. For those of you who set that up, you either need to send a link to your customer to get them consent to DAP, or if you have global admin, you need to go do that. GDAP does require consent, but we're allowing for implied consent if someone is given the partner DAP access. We're going to use implied consent or the GDAP consent for a very limited time. Again, this is another thing I don't know when it's going to go away, but it's probably going to go away sooner than we would all like. So it's another reason to get GDAP set up for your customers sooner than later. And it's important. I want to point out that DAP and GDAP can work together. So far, I set up a lot of GDAP. I haven't found things I can't do with it. But if you're worried, GDAP takes precedence over DAP, which means that if you exclude a couple users who have DAP access now, they'll still have DAP access once you set up GDAP, so that you can have a little bit of both if you need to test some things out to make sure stuff's not going to break by setting this up. Okay, so we selected Anya 1. I'm just going to click Next. You can review all our settings. You can see the roles that we've assigned to each of the groups. And when we click Finish, it's going to complete the wizard. So that's it. GDAP is now set up for Anya 1. I stayed in one interface, set it all up. I didn't have to go and pop in and out and set up groups, and it's very straightforward, very easy for folks to understand. And we've checked off the first item on our list. Now, if the customer also needs admin roles, we're not going to use GDAP for that, but we just, we'd typically use the built-in administrative roles in the tenant. Ideally, give them, something other than global admin if we can. It brings us up to our next topic of global admins, is to create emergency access account. So recommended Microsoft best practice. We recommend 2 cloud-only accounts. So these are accounts that are not synced with Active Directory. And I recommend securing these with FIDO keys. Now let's get into it. So if I wanted to set up an emergency access account in that customer I just created, I go into the customer tenant and just add a user. So in this case, I'm going to add AA admin or AA admin 1. I'm not going to assign a license to this user, best practice. And I've given this emergency access account the global admin role. Now, I typically exclude this admin from conditional access policies. So the way I like to set that up is I create a group called exclude from conditional access or something like that, and I put this account in it so that in the case I'm locked out of the tenant, I make a mistake in a policy, I can use this account to unlock it. In this case, I'm going to go and add AA admin 1 to the conditional access exclusion group that I created. Okay. Now we do need to set up the FIDO keys. So in this case, I do this in the Entra Admin Center or the older Azure Active Directory Center. It's in authentication methods in both portals. We go into authentication methods. It's brand new tenant. I have not configured any policies. So here I'm going to go and configure the FIDO2 security key policy. Now I'll enable the policy. It's okay to enable it for all users. I think is a good practice. There may be other users that you either want or they want to use a FIDO key. It's a great idea. You can restrict the use of the FIDO key to these admins if you choose to. We can configure it. The defaults are usually acceptable. If you wanted to restrict the FIDO keys to a certain brand of keys, you can do that by importing the AA GUID. You can either find the GUID from the manufacturer, or once you register a key, you can see what that is. But for most SMB scenarios, I wouldn't do this. The defaults usually work really well. That's it. So we've enabled FIDO2 security keys in the tenant. We cannot administratively enroll the key. We have to do it in the user context themselves. So we log in as that new admin user we created. I'm going to go into the security info. Now you have to have 2FA already configured to set up a FIDO2 key. So if you didn't set up any MFA already on this user, you will have to set one method up. In this case, I just set up Authenticator first. We're going to add a sign-in method, security key. Now we're going to go through all the prompts on the operating system to set up that key. It's going to ask me if I have NFC or a USB device. In my case, I have a USB key. It's going to let me know that it's going to create a credential using that key. Here we go. The operating system has come in asking me what kind of key I want to use. So in this case, I have an external key. We're going to set that key up, following the prompts. It's going to ask me to insert the key, which is easy enough. I do that. Enter the PIN of my key, which I set up when I purchased the key. And away we go. So now, and I've named this emergency access AA admin 1. In this particular use case where we're securing emergency break glass accounts, I think it makes a lot of sense to name them as such. I think it would also make a lot of sense to have more than one key, either have 2 keys on one admin, or better yet, 2 admins with 1 key each. That way you can give one emergency break glass to your customer. I think that's a really good idea. And then you as the partner keep one. Physically secure that key, make sure the PIN is available when needed, and then you have a emergency access account properly configured and configured for strong authentication, the strongest authentication for both your copy and the customer's copy. In our guide, I also recommend logging when this user logs in. This has become a little bit tricky with the new audit policies. We used to have an audit policy available, a custom type, where you could send an alert just based on user login. You still can do that. We have to do it in a bit different way if you're using the new unified alert policies that are the same between Security Center and Purview. And I have the link in the guide for that. Okay. So our keys all set up. We now have our emergency access account, and we can check that off the list. So the next set of work is to set up MFA for our admins, our users, block legacy auth. This is another area that Lighthouse does a really good job on, so I'm going to show it that way. So if I'm in Lighthouse and I want to set this up for one customer or all my customers, I just click on tenants on the left-hand navigation. I'm going to pick the tenant I want to set this up for, so we're going to pick on U1 again. We go into that tenant, I'm going to click on deployment plans. And deployment plans are Microsoft's recommendations for setting up a tenant. If you haven't looked at this in a while, you probably noticed that the list has grown, and it is growing. And one thing that I'm super excited about is that the Lighthouse team is working with our team to kind of make this over time, this security guide and these deployment steps will get more similar and more similar. No guarantees they'll always be the same, but so far we've been working really well together where, if they've, they'll use the guide for some inspiration on what they put in here and vice versa. And so we've made a commitment to each other. If there's any differences or daylight between what's in the security guide and what's in these deployment steps, we're going to work it out. So we're basically telling partners the same thing in both places. Deployment guide, though, is automated. That's what's super cool about this. You don't have to set it all up, and you can set it up consistently for every single one of your customers. So in my deployment plans, at the top of the list is to set up MFA for our admins. So it's going to go and do that. I can click on that deployment step. I can read a little bit about it. Click deploy. We click deploy. I can fill this out. I can enable it, or I can enable it for reporting. Lower on the screen are more options. If I want to exclude my exclusion group from this policy, I can do that. Now, one thing that's sort of new in Lighthouse is actually going to go look in the tenant and see, are there any existing configurations that touch what this is going to touch, and tell you about it. It's perfectly acceptable to have it already configured and just mark this as compliant. The policy will figure that out for you. It'll tell you if there's settings involved that are not compliant with this policy and let you resolve it, which I think is really, really nice. And this will also tell you if something has changed over time. So if you go and set this up and someone else changes something or the customer changes something, Lighthouse will show this policy, it'll flag it as non-compliant, so long as there's actually a setting that conflicts with it. Now, if someone just changes something and it doesn't conflict with this policy, it'll remain compliant. So it's really, really nice. In near future versions of this, also we'll be able to customize these policies. It's not quite there yet, but that's coming really, really soon, where you'll be able to customize the policy or go set a tenant up the way you want to. If it's different from this, then import those settings as your own baseline deployment steps. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to set up the MFA for my admins. It did detect that there was conditional access policy in place, and it gave me all the details on those, so I could go see if I need to go do something before I enable this policy. Okay. And then I'm going to get a screen. It tells me what it's about to do. I'm going to push the M365 Lighthouse require MFA for admins policy into the tenant. When I hit confirm, it's going to do just that. In a few steps, I've completed MFA for this customer. I can move on to another customer or continue work in this customer, which is what we're going to do. We're going to work down this checklist. So I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to complete the MFA for users. It's largely the same block legacy authentication. It's mostly the same, or it's largely the same set of steps. Goes by really quickly. And now we've actually completed the base level identity protection for this tenant. And in real world, getting this far just takes a couple minutes. It goes really, really fast once you get used to it. All right, so it's time for our Q&A break. I did, as promised, I wanted to give the audience time to provide feedback, ask questions, etc. So if one of my other teammates can let me know, are there any questions in the Q&A chat that I should answer before we move on?
Hey, David, there was one interesting question I think you should be looking at, and that's, can you maybe articulate the difference between secure score and those deployment guidance rules that you were showing here?
Sure. So the deployment steps are prescriptive steps where we're recommending that partners do, okay? Now, secure score is a different type of recommendation. It's a gamification engine we created for customers, and it's a very useful tool. The secure score will look at ways you can improve your security. The deployment steps here are probably, they'll match with secure score because these are what we think are the most important. That's the end of where these things overlap. The secure score sort of looks at everything that could be done in a tenant, but it's not really, it's useful, but it's not organized by prescriptive as the deployment steps are or our guide is. We took a different look at these two things and basically tried to come up with what are all the things we think partners should really focus on. Also, I think secure score is a great tool, but I prefer to use a guide. I prefer to use cybersecurity frameworks. So I hope that answers the question. Secure Score is also it's similar, but it's not built by the same team either. So there's quite a bit difference of like how it came to be inside the tenants.
Okay, and I've got another one. If you don't use DAP or role-based access yet, can you move to GDAP immediately?
You can. So if you don't have DAP at all, you can certainly go into Partner Center and request GDAP from your customer. The interface isn't as cool as nice as Lighthouse. Last time I checked, Lighthouse had a dependency for the tenant to show up on DAP. So this is last time I checked. This may have changed. I know the engineering team has been working on removing that dependency, but the flow was turn on DAP so the tenant appears in Lighthouse, then run the GDAP wizard and turn off DAP. And the GDAP wizard is good enough where I'd still recommend that until the Lighthouse team removes the dependency of needing DAP to get going. And they may have already done. I haven't checked in on that particular dependency. I know they were working on it, but last time I checked, they required DAP in order to onboard the customer into Lighthouse in the first place. And they were working hard on removing that dependency.
Great, and there was one more that we can take. Are there any Microsoft approved PowerShell scripts or any tools for automating this?
Yeah, so in the written version of the guide, we started with listing out all the individual settings. So for example, the BitLocker policy, we have like every little setting written on in there. We didn't do it with everyone. Some are a bit self-explanatory and some we honestly didn't get to yet. But our goal or work in progress is to create automatable, scriptlets and JSON files that describe these settings so that you will have it in the guide of what the settings are. It's kind of release common denominator. But we started a GitHub library and we're working on that now to build out some automation. And then Lighthouse is already working on automation inside the deployment steps. We've got a couple avenues here working simultaneously. So if anyone wants to automate sooner, I dropped my email address in the front page of that document. If there's something you'd really like to see done first, feel free to shoot me an email. There's a few of us working on this. Some of you might be familiar with my friend Alex Fields. He loves to write PowerShell scripts to automate stuff. So we've already got a good head start on quite a bit of it. And I think everything in there could be scripted. We can't think of anything that's not possible. We might run into a couple things that can't be, but by and large, most of this stuff is, doable via PowerShell. In worst case, maybe we have to use PowerShell to talk to the graph, but even that's become fairly straightforward these days.
Okay, that was the last question. I think you can either continue or have a break.
Well, yeah, we have a break, so I'm going to give folks a few minutes to grab some coffee, and I'm going to grab some myself. If anyone else has questions, suggestions, or things they'd like to talk about, feel free to drop it in the chat, or feel free to take a break, and we'll resume in about 5 minutes. By the way, for anyone interested in email hygiene and email security, we have the product group on this call. So I'm going to encourage everyone to ask your toughest questions, because the person who can probably answer them is right here with us. I know some folks might be wondering where's the rest of the identity stuff. I hope I mentioned earlier, we do have an advanced identity section. So this piece of identity is what I believe we need to get through first, and get into email and apps. There's plenty more to work with when inside of Azure AD Premium P1.